Welcome back after the coffee break. And you'll agree that after a fascinating first session, we're all set to now talk about an issue that was also touched upon by one or two speakers in the first session, and that is dealing with critical materials, minerals, and supply chains. We are very fortunate to have Mr. Gautam Chakramanne to chair this session. He is the Vice President at the Observer Research Foundation, ORF, who are now our new partners in this endeavor. His principal area of research focuses on the economic and political landscape of India, along with international economic affairs, with particular emphasis on the G20 nations. So, absolutely the right person to have chairing this session now. His past appointments include as executive editor, business at Hindustan Time, editor special projects at the Indian Express and the Financial Express. There's one correction in the biodata, which is probably in your folders. He has not authored 4 books, but 8 books. Yeah, and we stand corrected, sir. I'm sorry for that. That update probably hadn't reached us, but we'll correct it right away. Amongst those additional books, apart from what is already in your folder, and see the diverse, range of the topics that he's written the books on. The first 4 you've written, you've read already. The others are Reform Nation, India 2030, and a book on Sri Aurobindo. So you can see that the vast range of subjects that he's tackled. And writing a book is not like writing an article in a newspaper. So that it takes much, much more than that. So we're very fortunate to have you chair this, sir. Colonel Anurag Avasthi, apart from what is written again in the introduction here, which has some fascinating achievements of Colonel Avasthi, but let me tell you something which doesn't appear here. He's an excellent combat soldier. And during the difficult period in J&K, he happened to be a company commander at a post which was just 800 meters away from a Pakistani post, and the firing used to take place almost on a daily basis. And he was all poised for some action which ultimately, for various reasons, couldn't take place. Otherwise, we would have been sitting in the Pakistani post. But so we have a rare combination here of a combat soldier and a corporate achiever. Just a few lines which I want to highlight, which are, of course, in your folders. He's a seasonal veteran, as it says, with extensive expertise and distinguished background in policy, government affairs, and international collaborations, primarily focusing on the Make in India initiative, which of course makes that very topical and very special. Currently, he is serving as the Vice President of India Electronics and Semiconductors Association. So, his responsibilities as the Vice President extend to engagement at both the central and state levels with at least 6 states, in addition to fostering international collaborations. We have thank God, lady participants, before we come under some severe critics of being not gender biased, not being gender equivalent. Anyway, Jahnavi Tripathi would be the next speaker. She holds the position of coordinator at the Think 20 India Secretariat and is an associate fellow with the Observer Research Foundation. In particular, their Geoeconomic Studies program. Her research portfolio encompasses a wide range of international trade policy matters, including but not limited to digital trade policy, gender-related aspects in trade, WTO reforms initiative, and standards. And a third speaker, I don't know whether I've got the order wrong, but the third speaker is Mr. Rishabh Jain. Nice having you here. He is the Senior Program Lead at the Council on Energy, Environment and Water, and leads the Council's Technology Future programs. His expertise revolves around critical minerals and renewable energy deployment, supply chain and manufacturing. Through his work, he has influenced policy design, reform and adoption. That is important because we have experts, but how much of it gets translated into policy reforms is a moot point. His core strength lies in the intersection of technology and sustainability with a focus on advancing the scale-up on RE. He has also been supporting various Indian ministries for the G20 Energy Transition Working Group. Again, very topical, considering the recent successful G20 conference we've had. Rishabh completed his bachelor's in mechanical engineering from Birla Institute of Technology and a master's in public policy from Lee Kuan Yew School of, we all know where that comes from, and where he was awarded the prestigious Li Ka-shing Scholarship. So we have a fascinating panel for this session, and over to you, sir, to conduct the proceedings.
Good morning, everybody. Namaskar. Glad to be in Pune. The last time I came, I got thrown out because I had applied for FTII. They didn't take me into that institute. After a 5-day interview, it was a very intense interview, and I thought I was going to be the next Amitabh Bachchan. But obviously, fate had different things for me. Now I'm back again, and this time again I'm terrified because of this table here. I think two of the people here are my gurus, Dr. Mashelkar, who has written a chapter in one of my books, and Dr. Kelkar, whose books I have read. And I refer to, I think the policy book that they launched, In Service of the Republic, is the finest book. It's the world's best book on economic public policy. Everybody, if you're in the public policy space, you must buy it, keep it, and keep it right next to your computer when you write. I like that innocence, sir. Critical minerals is an emerging area for me. I'm a student here. Hardly 2 or 3 talks I have done on this topic, but it's fast emerging as the next challenge for economic security. A small challenge, but yet nonetheless, it has enough scale. And my panel here will educate us on how it goes, what are the nuances. The biggest, of course, has been repeated. I will be repeating it which was said in the previous talk. Very illuminating talk, by the way. Thank you. That China, has a monopoly. And what was not said, and luckily I can say it freely, is that China is a rogue nation. And I think it will use any and everything in its power to stay where it is, or in the face of falling GDP growth or prosperity, it will do what it takes to stay there. My views are only a public expression of what other people may be more polite about. One final word, that when we come to the Q&A, which I've been told should be long, and I look forward to the Q&A. I would like all the 3 women winners of last night who got those prizes to do ask questions. We do need more women, and I actually mean it. I'm glad that we have Jahnavi in this session, and I would like you young students also, we would like to hear your voices over there. Thank you. I'll start with Colonel Avasthi. We'll move on to Jahnavi, and then we go to Mr. Jain.
It's still good morning. It's not good afternoon. Morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Anurag Avasthi, and I have this distinct pleasure of speaking in front of General Patankar. He was my GOC in 28 Div, the Vajra division, while I was a lowly company commander on a big KDL of his, trying to protect the motherland. in the times of Operation Vijay during Kargil. It's a great privilege to see General Shami Mehta. Since I'm a tank man, he's a doyen, and we've always only heard him, seen him, and grow up the way we are today. So nice to see you again. Dr. Kelkar, you may not know me, but my macroeconomics professor in the Indian School of Business was Ajay Shah, and my microeconomics professor was Susan, his wife. So I know you since in the service of the Republic and so on and so forth from the Indian School of Business. So I had transitioned from the military to the corporate through the Indian School of Business, which took me the way I was, and one has been kind enough to see a great amount of people from your fraternity there teaching me and honing me to the place that I've been today. Very kind of you. Great to see others also. Gautam Bambewale, I keep reading him, and it's a great pleasure in coming and speaking to all of you here. And thank you to PIC and ORF as well. Firstly, the clean air here in Pune smells funny. So I'm coming from Delhi, so I'm trying to get a little haze. Either way, in the next around 5-7 minutes of the opening remarks, I will get down into the historical perspective of as to how the critical materials, minerals, and various other things which are related to semiconductors, which are going to be powering critical technologies, the AI and the MLs of the future are so important. A lot of people have these, intentions or myths, and they keep asking me, have we missed the bus? Is India late in the semiconductor quest, and so on and so forth? No, it isn't. Because the reasons of most of the things lie in history. You'll be surprised, the first semiconductors were established here in the country as early as the 1960s by the Fairchild enterprises from the United States. It didn't work out because of the economy of scales and so on and so forth. Then it was a 65 war and 71 operation, so on and so forth. So by the time BEL came into being and started making transistors and PCBs, looking at these critical minerals and materials imported from all over the world, it was a little difficult to compete with the world players because the prices were far lower. So I mean, it's simple business sense. If you're getting something cheaper outside, you don't make it. 79, the government first took out the Indian semiconductor policy, and in 1983, the semiconductor laboratory at Mohali was established, the first public sector enterprise, and the only fab in India, the fabrication facility, which is still running. Let's not go into the nanometer tangle, but it's still running. A point here to note is that TSMC was established in 1987. And in 1989, there was a massive fire in the semiconductor laboratory, which you all know, and nobody knows how it was, and there are no conspiracy theories and there are no narratives. But we all know how it was at the end of the day. Somewhere down the line, when your economy opened in 1991, a cost of a small chip abroad was 8 times lesser than what was anticipated to be making the same thing here. Obviously, it didn't take off. But COVID was a game changer. Now, the problem is that this historical perspective has made India understand the importance of semiconductors and the importance of critical minerals, materials, and rare earths. This is not late, it's just an exercise in the making. There's nothing very bad about it. You're not late, as per me. Now, when you look at the entire market in India, everything starts with the market. Your overall chip market in India in 2021 was placed at $23.2 billion. 23.2 is likely to reach 80 billion by 2030. 80 billion is a lot of money, so to say. Now let's look at it from a very different perspective. See, I keep telling a lot of people that technology is politics. It's a very profound statement. Technology is politics, totally. I mean, you can give it any way, any which way you can, you can quote it in whatever fervor you want to do it, but technology is politics. Now you look at it, the troika for making a chip or a semiconductor ecosystem lies in 3 things. The first is the equipment, the thing which makes it. So I will not be very technical. I will not be getting into, a lot of technical jargon to bore you. But the first thing is equipment, which is required to make those chips. The second is materials. That is these critical minerals, materials, gases. And the third is the service industry, packaging, testing, logistics, so on and so forth. Now let's look at the world map in our minds and see how does it pan out. Equipment. 80% of equipment is made by the Yanks. 52% of IPs, United States of America. Some part of it in Europe, with total hegemony on the lithographic machines by ASML, Netherlands. Total, it's a monopolistic market. Nobody else makes it. Nobody else knows how to make it. Then you come down to the foundries, all foundries in Asia, Taiwan, Korea, Japan, Malaysia, China. Not very much, but China. Packaging, all in China. Testing, everything in China, the entire industry. Now, juxtapose this with the rare earths and the materials monopolized by China. 96% of world's production, Chinese. And then you add on to it the problem of the COVID pandemic and the Ukraine, and now of course Gaza, and look at the stretched supply chains. It's a recipe for disaster. So that is how it pans out. So when we went 2 years ago and booked a car, the dealer told us it will take 2 years, 1.5 years, waiting period. It's never happening earlier. You go to a bank, you tell them I want a credit card, they say it will take 8 weeks because it doesn't have that low hanging chip. So that is how it pans out as time progresses. Now these supply chains which I just mentioned to you, they are on the intersection of technology, economics, and geopolitics. It's as simple as that. So anybody who says or believes that it is just mere technology, well, it doesn't work that way. It isn't. In the present context, India stands in a very, very major sweet spot. 21% of designers in the world for semiconductors are based here in India. Fabrication facilities will come at the end of the day, but fabrication facilities are not manpower intensive. Designing is. A lot of people may not understand that after even you get these critical metals, materials, etc., we must understand that in this entire space, the profit margins in the designing part of a chip, no matter whether you get these critical materials or minerals, is 40 to 45%. In manufacturing, it is as low as 8%. So it makes an astute business sense to cultivate this as well. So fabless entities are as important as the fabs, so to say. In addition to this, there is a large amount of change coming through the Indian semiconductor policy, which has been released in the December of 2021. The PLI coming, somebody spoke on it today. The DLI coming in, specs, various other things coming in today. And the most game-changing equation is the country joining the Mineral Supply Alliance when Honorable Prime Minister Modi visited Washington, D.C. last. This is going to be a game changer. Now, how it pans out in times to come, how we move this spectrum into the high and critical technologies, how we harness the 7% of REEs which we hold here in India, how we process them, how we make them open to the public-private partnership is a question in making. But as I always say, let me close my opening remarks, I'm at 9 minutes, is that India is a country which has the capability of disappointing both the optimist and the pessimist alike. So let's be optimistic. Thank you very much.
I've been asking Ms. Tripathi to follow her and become a doctor so that she can sit on this table. So she's assured me that she's going to enroll for a PhD.
Yes, yes.
Because it's, otherwise I have to call her Miss Tripathi rather than Dr. Tripathi.
I'm sure the doctor, lacking doctor in front of my name, will not stop me this afternoon at least. Hello everyone. I am happy to be here, happy to be part of this first conversation that we're having together as ORF PIC. So it's a privilege to be here today with you. Let me start by, when I was at LSE, there was this really interesting quote that was in front of our Econ 101 room. It was a quote by Robert Coase, which basically suggests that you can bend statistics far enough, they will tell you whatever they want you to say. It's a common adage amongst economists, and I want to start by saying I'm not an economist. So please forgive me in case you don't like where this is going. Mostly because statistics on critical minerals cannot be bent. They are a limited resource. You can only find more of them. But what we know so far is the truth as it comes to critical minerals. Why are they relevant to us? Why are we discussing critical minerals? How many of you have an iPhone in the room? Okay, a large number of you. How many of you have a Samsung phone maybe? Okay, 3, 4, okay. How many of you use MacBooks, iPads? A large majority of you. Your MacBooks, your iPhones have something called an octa-core processor, right? Every CPU is built with a chip, a semiconductor chip, which Sir has very eloquently told us the history of. How many transmitters do you think that one chip has? Any guesses from the audience? Okay, but what product? Are you talking about an iPhone? Yeah, so iPhone 1 billion, you say. Okay, an A15 chip, which is in an iPhone, will have 15 billion transmitters. 15 billion. So I'm just trying to tell you the quantities, which like it's the most minuscule part of your phone, right? But it is at the end of the day the heart of your cell phone. You can't live without your cell phones. We were robbed of our cell phones for 5 hours yesterday, and I think we all reached for our cell phones at least 10 times in those 5 hours. So when we try to say that critical minerals are important and they're part of your security story, it's not a casual statement. It is part of the future that you are looking at, because you want to be a key player in the technology field. You want to be a key player in the green energy transition, and energy transition Rishabh will touch on, where you're talking about new batteries, which when you talk about it in these terms, in these absolute terms, you may not always think that this is relevant to your personal story, but at the end of the day, it is relevant to your personal story. Because if you're talking about cell phones, smartphones, production of smartphones in India, you're also talking about the disruption of supply of critical products to make these smartphones, which are the parts of these smartphones you're making in India. If you want to make, Apple has made a big investment in India. Can Apple produce Apple products in India without help from China if we don't have secure supply of critical materials? 97%, as Sir mentioned, is in China. Out of the 30 critical minerals that the Mines Ministry of India has identified, 10 of those we are 100% dependent on for imports. Like we're 100% import dependent. The rest lie between 57 to a good 95% import dependence. Is it because we lack these resources locally? Is it because we lack the technology for it? The answer is both. Obviously, India cannot reach parity or like 100%, yes, we will have all critical materials in India. It's not possible, because it's naturally impossible, it is geographically impossible. But are we able to build relationships? Are we able to build partnerships that secure supply? Yes, we are. Are there technologies we can use to build capacities in India? Yes, we can. Let's take the example of gallium. Gallium is seen in the sector as one of the big replacements for silicon. We know of the silicon revolution. Gallium is the next best thing, we're told. Gallium production was first discussed in India in 1997. It's a technology that we are aware of because it's a byproduct of other aluminium production, which is rampant in India. So why have we stopped trying to develop these technologies? Is it because the public sector has so far got a monopoly on this sector? We don't know, because it's not been studied. Is it because we don't have enough private investment? We don't know. It's not been studied. So this lack of knowledge is actually impacting very key decision-making points. And if we don't fill that gap of knowledge very quickly, when we're trying to build these new relationships, these new partnerships that we've joined, FTA partners are not discussing these things. We had the conclusion of the EU-India TTC recently, where we have an MOU on semiconductors, but it's all, oh, we will try to do this, we will intend to do this, but where is the action? Where are we taking action on this? We can have a PLI scheme, but that is, that's just one, okay, we'll give you money, you do the work. Without knowledge in the economy, you can't actually function better in the economy. We've seen China weaponize critical materials. It's happening as we speak. They've stopped supply of certain critical materials. It created the chip crisis during the COVID pandemic. So when we are implicated in such specific fashions for our day-to-day functioning, whether it be your laptops, your smartphones, it impacts on something that is part of the India story, which is our digital transformation, which is our green transformation. So finding ways to secure critical materials gets us back to this national security element, because as the previous speaker mentioned, your economic security is your national security. If you don't have a satisfied citizenry with enough jobs, with the right kind of livelihoods, with the right kind of access, you will have problems you will face. The third thing that I want to talk about is the market. The market does not function in a vacuum. Right? China is creating a necessary, like it has decided, we will create this vacuum in the market. We want these materials at home. So India has a rare opportunity post-COVID to fill this vacuum strategically. Are we doing enough to fill this vacuum? Are we getting the right technologies in? Are we making the right kind of relationships? I will stop here and leave that up for questions and hand over the mic.
Hello everyone, I'm Rishabh Jain from the Council on Energy, Environment and Water. It's an honor and privilege to be speaking to all of you. In the few hours yesterday evening, I learned so much. Unfortunately, my interaction with the defense and army forces and the personnel have been very, very limited. And I realized the importance and also the interest that the group has on some of these topics. And I think there's a clear need, and maybe more actively from our side also, to reach out to some of the experts from you, to also maybe input and provide some of the analysis, or maybe add those nuances in some of the work that we do. So I represent the Council on Energy, Environment and Water. We are a 13-year-old non-profit policy research institution based in New Delhi, India. We use data, integrated analysis and strategic outreach to explain and change the use, reuse and misuse of resources. We aim for certain transformations, as you see on the left side: low carbon economy, focusing on energy transition, improving power markets, decarbonizing the industry, and building on sustainable livelihoods, to basically improve the quality of life through better air, water, food systems, by using certain enablers. So I lead the team on technology futures. We are a 250 plus multidisciplinary organization focusing and interacting with around 20 states across the country. We were actively engaged with 13 plus ministries at the national level for India's G20 presidency, and my team wrote 3 reports for Ministry of Power, MNRE and Ministry of Mines on some of the topics that I'll be talking about today. So Gautam has told me that I have 10 minutes. I have a long presentation, but I'll try to go quickly through some of these slides. Happy to have and maybe even share the presentation later. India has a 2070 net zero target. I'm sure many of you are already aware about it, but there are different ways to reach those targets. So you of course need solar, wind, batteries, hydro, thermal, coal, whatever, in different ratios, but those ratios are not decided. The broader plan is there, but how and in what ratio or share will those be can vary significantly. And how that pans out really impacts our critical minerals requirement itself. However, our analysis also suggests that this is a USD $10 trillion opportunity with an investment that will be of to the tune of 200 billion per year itself. And this is the same for global capacity. So if you see the graphs, on the left side specifically, these are the annual deployment of some of these clean energy technologies to reach global net zero target by 2050. Some of these analyses have been done by the International Energy Agency. On the left side, you see the annual deployment of solar and wind, and by 2030, 2050, you see the amount of increase that will be required going forward, which then means that we need to manufacture some of these technologies at the same pace, and also we require minerals accordingly. Similar projections for batteries and electrolyzers, more stark because the sector is only starting off right now. So, as I said, the global manufacturing capacities will need to scale up for increased demand. And the next two slides basically talks about that the supply chain of some of these technologies are very, very complex and involves multiple steps. So there's of course the resource production, then there's material, component manufacturing, technology manufacturing, and of course installation. And every step is and takes years of expertise and development to do it. It's not easy. Of course, moving from backward and doing the assembly is fairly easy and takes less time. But some of the earlier steps, from including on setting up some of these mines, takes years and maybe even a decade to build expertise on. Similar processes on batteries and electrolyzers. This is an interesting graph where it says that if we have to meet our net zero targets, what is the global manufacturing capacity and what is the current gap? So if you see on the left side, the 3 bars, it says, I think for solar cell, module, and I think that's wafer. The green bar is what is the capacity that is already there. The blue is what is the capacity that is planned. So we'll potentially be able to, or there are plans already in place by many companies to scale up that capacity. But the gray bars that you see are the steps where the manufacturing capacity is not even planned, which then means there can be potential disruptions if you have to meet the broader targets of net zero. Now this is global, and I'll say why global, what is happening globally is very, very important for us. So resource and technical constraints can lead to concentrated supply chains. 15 countries are home to 55% of each of these identified critical minerals. So India has identified 30 minerals that are critical, and then a subset of those are called strategic and critical minerals, 24 of them. But 7 of those minerals are very important for energy transition. And we can see the concentration of some of these minerals and where they are necessarily found. And similarly, the concentration or where they are produced. So it does not necessarily mean that if the minerals are found in the same place, the production is at the same rate. For instance, lithium, the largest reserves are in Chile, but the largest production is in Australia. So it depends on how does the country necessarily have the technology, expertise, investments to necessarily ramp up the production. And this is a graph that I think all of us are already aware, and the previous speakers have already mentioned. The blue bars are the share of China in some of these steps. Now the problem is, I would say, not because it is in China. The problem is the concentration, and we need to, for ourselves, fight the concentration. Of course, the layer that this is China is another set of problem, but if the concentration was being even Europe, America, or any other country, which can potentially happen now, we would equally be vulnerable for our own energy transition. And we see that many of the countries or others have very small share in these, and India is very less in many of these and may not even exist. We did this study for the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy for the G20 Energy Transition Working Group to understand what does this concentration mean? Because I mean, concentration for me can mean very different, for you it may be very different. So we use the HHI index, and we said that the trade or the countries that are importing some of these products, how concentrated is their trade? And HHI index greater than 0.25, we termed it as concentrated. And we saw that the countries which are low middle income countries and high middle income countries have way more concentration than the high income countries, which means that the countries that are maybe starting off on their energy transition are more vulnerable. And there is a need then to think that not just in India, but what is the role then India can play in the global south to even solve for some of the problems that exist globally. And and there are similar concentrations that exist in electrolytes. I'll skip this. The diversification of value chain is essential. With diversification of midstream is a likely challenge. So we are, through multiple schemes that have been mentioned earlier, we are trying to indigenize the value chains of solar, wind and batteries. But what we are increasingly realizing is the middle step. I mean, of course, the resources are concentrated. We cannot do anything about those minerals. But the middle step is where the technology is concentrated, and developing some of these technologies will take years of expertise, development of infrastructure, and it's very tech heavy, and that's a bigger challenge for many countries and even companies as they want to ramp up the facility. So there's technical complexity and rapid innovation also that is happening. There's equipment and component availability, specialized skills are required. The cost of financing for some of these steps are very, very high, and access to minerals and cheap energy is of course another factor, because some of these steps are again energy intensive. I'll skip this slide. I'll mention, I think in the previous session there's one talk on there are these alternative technologies that are being developed. So this is a Google map. I don't know if how much Google Maps many of you use here, but if we have to reach a particular destination, Google Maps always shows us different options that we can take to reach a particular destination. And as I said, in the net zero, there are different possibilities of solar, wind and batteries. But not just that, even within solar there are multiple technologies. Even within wind there are multiple technologies, different kinds of batteries that are available. And what does this mean? That as the country decides that this is where we want to be, accordingly the mineral requirement can also vary significantly going forward. For instance, in solar PV, there are tons of these minerals and metals that are mentioned, same for wind, etc. But not all of those minerals are found in every technology, which then means that the requirement of minerals for each technology can vary significantly. So if we ramp up one kind of technology, the requirement of that mineral may either increase or reduce going forward. And some of these technologies are in the very nascent stage or still in the labs, etc. But maybe a dedicated focus on some of these can help us solve some of the mineral challenges that may exist. For instance, if you see the battery material intensity, the left three technologies require a lot of lithium. But in the vanadium flow and sodium ion technologies, there's no lithium requirement itself in the first place. But both of them are, the sodium ion is still in the very early stages of even production. But maybe by end of this decade, early next decade, if that technology scales up, the whole problem of lithium or the requirement of lithium may go away. There's a company based in Chennai that is now producing motors that don't require rare earth. All of us are of course concerned about the availability, but if there are products that are being developed or can be developed and now being developed in India for two-wheelers, three-wheelers EV, we don't necessarily require rare earth. So either we figure out how we develop or get the supply of some of these minerals, or maybe develop our technological capability that we even completely remove the requirement of some of these minerals. And there is no way to predict all of this. There are competing market scenarios which say that the share of a particular technology will increase, the share of a particular technology will decrease, and it keeps changing every year. So any policy that the government has to enact needs to be agile enough, and the government should not be in the business of choosing a particular technology. So that is what we are trying to work with the government to say, that how you can be agile enough that if tomorrow sodium ion technology scales up, we don't necessarily fail in our broader industrialization policy itself. I'll skip some of these slides. So this is just like two examples that what happens if a particular kind of battery scales up, the requirement of lithium, graphite, cobalt, nickel can vary significantly. Go ahead. So all of these are, there's another problem that there are competing national policies. Now every country which has the resources wants to indigenize and move up the value chain. They have the minerals, they want to manufacture batteries. They have the minerals, they want to manufacture solar modules. And there are examples from US, Europe and even China, of course China is there, where the manufacturing, they want to localize manufacturing and completely shut down their borders. Now, for instance, under the IRA Act in US, they are putting in nearly $400 billion to support domestic manufacturing. This is unprecedented. Our PLI scheme is around $10 billion. There are $400 billion in the next couple of years. Competing with some of these policies, because at the end of the day, if we have to even export, or maybe if we start importing some of these products, how would our domestic manufacturers compete in the long term? Similarly, Europe wants to scale up their domestic facility because everyone is worried that they are so much dependent on China or on few countries. But national policies in global north is now distracting investors from countries like India and other developing countries. So these are some examples. I mean, Indian companies are now planning to set up manufacturing facilities in the US itself. So these are Epsilon, Vikram Solar, Hyundai, and of course, even European companies are now going to US. However, despite all of these, there are opportunities to increase domestic value add within a country. These are, of course, the numbers that I mentioned, that India has a huge potential and plan going forward. And this particular graph, we see that the manufacturing, the growth of the manufacturing sector has been increasing, but the share of manufacturing in India's GDP is more or less constant, which means that there's a potential that the manufacturing sector can contribute more in India's growth. There are, as I said, some examples of Indian companies, foreign companies setting up in India, but also some of these Chinese companies setting up in global south to increase the domestic value add in those. And there are different ways one can do. If you have mining or if you have the resource, countries can look into processing and maybe then export of some of these materials. If countries have large markets, they can figure out that maybe they'll do the assembly component. And then there are countries which have high-tech capabilities, they can focus on midstream manufacturing. What this slide says is that any country that would want to focus on everything may potentially face a problem. Finally, I mean, there is a clear need of collaboration and cooperation because there is global overcapacity and there are competitiveness concerns. There's a high cost of capital, some of these processes. There's a need for specialized skills. There are now trade barriers that are being set up to close certain boundaries, access to technology, and then there are clean tech uncertainty. So these are open questions that need to be discussed and debated and also be formed as part of the policy that the government chooses going forward. Thank you. I'll stop here.
Thank you. I think that gave us a clear overview of the sector and what we are up against. I'll start with Colonel Avasthi. Let's take Mr. Jain's idea forward, where he hinted at, but I think since you are actually in the trenches, how will a PPP model or how will government enter this business? We are generally suspicious after 1991 of government being in business. From 2014, Prime Minister Modi has said less government, more governance, etc., etc. So it's getting out of business. They have identified 4 sectors which are strategic, in which there will be public sector companies. Everything else will be privatized. This now appears to be a reversal in terms of a geopolitical what we have seen happening across the world, and in terms of resource allocation, resource control, domestic nationalism, etc., that as though government is coming back in business. It could be because of scale, it could be because of non-accountability, it could be several reasons. How do you see this being transcribed in India?
Right, great question, Gautam. To start with, let me, first come down to Janvi. You just mentioned, as you know, that you may have the resources, but you require the knowledge. I would go a little step further and say, beyond knowledge, firstly, you need to have demand. There's no demand. The second thing is, Rishabh, you mentioned about lithium in Australia. And you would be knowing that the Indian government is now in talks with the Australians to harness this lithium, because the quality and the quantity of lithium which is there in Australia is very similar to what we found in J&K. It is solid rock. Unlike the South American lithium, which is brine, which is easier to essentially process. So there is a method in the madness insofar as these two things are there, so to say. Now, before I start answering this, Gautam, we have to understand one very simple thing. 5-6 years back, while sitting in the second line in Chandragupta Hall in Higher Command course in Army War College, there was one very erudite man from the Indian space sector who was asked a question by the High Command course as to why is the Indian space a success story. He had just one sentence to say. He said, because it was made the strategic sector. Simple. As simple as that. Everything else panned out from that. Now, when you look at this PPP thing in this, we have to understand one more important thing, that is when you look at the industry and the government. The government doesn't have that expertise but it has the economy of scales. The industry has the expertise, but doesn't have the economy of scales. So you have to bridge this. The moment you can bridge this, PPP in this will work. Now, let's start from the basic facts. When you look at PPP in this critical minerals and materials space, demand is not there, entrepreneurship is not there, and there is no private sector footprint as we speak today. That's the story as we speak. Now, the moment this is changed into a strategic sector and made lucrative for the private entrepreneurs, I think things will work out. We've all seen in space, we've seen Skyroot and all these people. I mean, it's a great sector to work in today, even in the private space. There are startups who are sending rockets up in space. So one is to make it a strategic sector. That is one, from the government side. Now, the Prime Minister's visit to the United States and signing the mineral security partnership with the Americans is going to be a game changer in this. I think this is a first part of getting into a PPP kind of a model insofar as this space is concerned in times to come. Now, again, as I always say, go back into history. It'll give you most of the answers. The Indian Rare Earths Limited is a public sector enterprise. It was established in 1950. I mean, 1950, I was in my previous birth sometime, maybe I don't know when, but it never took off. Then came Toyota Toshito sometime in 2011, 2010, 2011, said, okay, let's join hands and start exploration of rare earths, etc. That also didn't take off. Because for a simple reason, it is not the government policy. There was no demand. So if there is no demand, nothing will take off. Now there is demand. So there is an astute case or of PPP coming into being, so to say. Now in addition to this, the government came with the, in exploration, they came up with the Mines and Mineral Development Amendment Act in 2021. It's a game changer. Now, how it pans out, it remains to be seen. See, no policy starts, it's like no plan survives contact. It takes time. I mean, you bring out a policy and you say tomorrow morning everything should be okay. Well, it doesn't work like that. It just can't. So it'll take a little while. The R&D has a great space for PPP. And the, places like Indian School of Mines and Dhanbad need to be really modeled on the centers of excellence. And one very important thing which we all missing is that the Indian chemical industry is the 6th largest in the world. It contributes 8% to the national GDP. All you need to do is harness it today by means of PPP, and then it's going to be another saga of the software story. I think that should be enough.
Thanks. Ms. Jahnavi, I'll just come to you. You made a very passing reference to the fact that these minerals are used in climate, and you also talked about the billion chips, the billion connections on our iPhones. Now, climate I may understand, okay, that it's needed and therefore it becomes critical. But I'm sure we can live without an iPhone. So where is the criticality? I mean, an iPhone is not a critical, to me, iPhone is not national security, except in terms of the protection, which is more a software issue than a chip issue. But where is the criticality in several of the luxury goods that we take for granted? For instance, in cars, in cards, etc., etc. Climate, yes, we have taken a stance that we are going to be a clean country, and we need to be. Coming from Delhi, we realize how important that is. But I don't see the criticality of these minerals in these luxury goods.
Thank you for the question. It's a luxury to you, sir. It's not a luxury to the man on the street, given our DPI push and our push for digital transformation, which would be impossible without smartphones. But that is a larger social good story of why smartphones are so important to the transformation in India. I think we forget that India some time back had come up with a champion sectors list. And one of the champion sectors that we had listed there is the ESDM sector, the electronic system design and manufacturing. chips, semiconductors are a critical aspect of the ESDM sector, which is expected to contribute largely to your $5 trillion economy by whenever is the new deadline. Right. So if we don't secure the supply of these products, whether it is through partnerships, whether it is through domestic capacity, whether it is through knowledge, whether it's through creating domestic demand, as you just mentioned, we must not lose sight of the fact that even in the green transition, it has a lot to do with technology. So the point I was making with your iPhone was not that oh, we need them because iPhones need them. It's the point I'm trying to make is that even an iPhone requires 15 billion transmitters in one chip that it uses, and in total it uses 5 chips, right? So if an iPhone is using that many chips, imagine how much an EV, a new kind of EV battery will require, how much a new kind of green transition technology will require. And also the climate conversation is not limited to new technologies to move the green transition. We also have to think backwards in the supply chain where we're discussing sustainable mining of these minerals, sustainable processing of these minerals, because a lot of the times the way we get to these minerals is not a clean process. It uses, we require coal mines, cobalt mining, aluminium mining, all of this mining and processing, all of it's not a clean process. And Rishabh, you have to add to that then, that, you know, how do we move backwards and clean up the supply chain and make sure that it is not adding to the climate stress that we are already under, but in fact is positively moving us towards a green transition.
Thanks. Mr. Jain, I have a very specific question for you. You mentioned it in passing. Now, value chains is almost like, you know, everybody knows everything about every value chain in this universe, but I don't. Can you describe me one value chain where in critical minerals, and how is it different from a value chain in, say, energy or in automotives?
Comparison may be difficult, but I'll maybe explain the value chain of one of these battery technologies, if that's...
Also, in terms of the strategic content, like the strategic aspects of that value chain.
Sure. So I'll just briefly explain and how does some of these processes happen. So there is a technology called nickel, manganese, cobalt, NMC batteries, a kind of lithium-ion battery. Now this requires, as the name suggests, nickel, manganese, cobalt, lithium, and a couple of other smaller minerals. And these minerals are available in very few locations. Now by lithium, I mean in the Latin America, in Australia, that is where most of the lithium is found. Cobalt, most of the cobalt is in Congo. Manganese, of course, slightly diversified. Now what happens is, many of these places do basic refining of some of these minerals. So in Latin America, you find these minerals in cellars. So basically you pump out the saline water, let it dry, then you get the salt, you do some basic processing, ship it to China. Australia ships the stones, the rocks to China. Unimaginable, but they ship the rocks. A developed country, 95% of the rocks go to China, even for the second step. You get very less lithium, but that is how it happens right now. The next step in batteries is something called precursor materials. So you make those technologies, and those are with not just handful of countries, but handful of companies also. Now, I mean, I said they are shipped to China, yes, but they're also shipped to some other countries in Europe. There are a few other players there. They make those precursor materials. And then the next step is there's something, the components called anode, cathode, electrolyte separators. Anode, which is an most important component made of graphite, 95% of the global anode manufacturing again rests in China. So there are some, so it's like, and like the semiconductor value chain is so complex and many countries are connected. Similarly is the battery value chain. However, knowing that this exists and NMC batteries have had the largest market share, what did China do? They knew that they don't necessarily have the minerals. They focused on the alternative chemistry called LFP batteries, lithium ferrophosphate, which did not require some of these. And they produce 90% or even more of the LFP batteries in China itself. And they, through their domestic procurement policies, they said that all the buses that will be deployed in China will only have LFP batteries, will not have NMC batteries, because they did not necessarily, when they were starting, have the capabilities. So through domestic push, by saying or creating a market that will require a particular kind of technology, they ensured that the domestic value chain also develops. And now, of course, China produces some of these batteries itself. While many countries are now, as I said, I was at a conference recently and I heard many countries like DRC, Philippines exports a lot of nickel. They're saying that, so say for instance, I heard someone from the Ministry of Mines in Philippines saying that we export $1 billion of nickel every year. And we have done some analysis. And if we do the domestic value add, this value can go as high as $20 billion. And similarly, DRC is saying that we have the cobalt, we want to make the precursor materials, we want to even make the batteries. Now it's not easy. In theory, yes, but as Colonel Avasthi already mentioned out, there are some of these processes are chemical intensive processes. You require chemical industries, you require ports, roads, infrastructure skills to develop some of these. So the value chain requires multiple kinds of skills. They are dependent on multiple factors that may already exist. Otherwise, taking that first step and developing that ecosystem is not easy. So I don't know if I answered your question, but
yeah, thank you. Thank you. It is complicated and we will need to delve deeper in this. I'm going to open it up to the audience, and it will begin with the three women who are sitting at the back but did some really good work recently. But you please think up your questions, raise your hand, identify yourself. But before that, Dr. Mashelkar, can I just have your attention for a minute here? None of us here is a scientist. And you are the person who's been talking about disruption, innovation, pole vaulting. You've been talking about startups. You've been talking about, in several forums, I've heard you say various things about how creativity, etc. Why are we so dependent? What is so critical about critical minerals that science cannot answer? Can somebody give him the mic, please?
First of all, my attention was taking notes from what they were saying, by the way. When I was typing out, I learned so much. So thank you, Anurag, thank you, Janvi, and thank you, Rishabh. There is nothing that India cannot do as far as the intellectual prowess is concerned. They are doing it up there. They can do it here. There is no question about that. Today, 1,200 plus multinational R&D centers in India, some of them producing 1/3 of their global IP. Indian IQ producing IP for them. So is it impossible? No. We can actually do it. There is an ecosystem challenge on which one can talk about 1 hour or more. So I will not get back to that. I will just focus on the three presentations that have been made. No, I agree with what you have said. There are a few points that I would like to sort of highlight. One is, you talked about rare earth and why did they not pick up. See, we used to export zirconium sand and import stabilized zirconia. Why didn't we develop this technology? As you said, because we did not have internal demand, but we had export potential, basically. Isn't it? Why didn't we do that? So this is something that is missing. I think we need to sort of deep dive into. That's the first part. The second part is talent, technology, and trust. We must have trust in ourselves. You understand? And there is a big challenge on that. You know, I have this Anjani Mashelkar Inclusive Innovation Award, and we give them only for creating next practice, not best practice, because I'm not a great believer in following, or making high technology work for the poor, and so on and so forth. I'll tell you the instance, because this is typical of India's challenge in the ecosystem. Navin Khanna made dengue, where you can detect dengue within 15 minutes as against 1 or 2 hours. US FDA approved, US patents, everything, high-class technology. We will not buy it. We are buying from South Korea, we are buying from Australia, we are buying from US. Then came pandemic. All the kids were getting exhausted. We went begging. Nobody would give it, excepting South Korea. as luck would have it, those kits were loaded on a ship that went to Africa, so we didn't have anything at all. Okay? What do? You go to Navin Khanna's kit, one day kit as he called it. His market share was 0%, it became 75% now. Today he is the dominant player. But had the ship come, it would be still 0%. So I think in the talent technology trust business, there is a lot one can talk about in terms of this thing.
So this is more of cultural, sir. I'm asking, can science replace these metals upon which we are so badly dependent? These critical minerals. Can science do something in metallurgical science or in even plastic sciences, for instance? Can that replace this? Because I feel the vulnerability of India, the vulnerability of other nations who don't own these stockpiles is so high, and can this even continue?
No, I think they perform certain functions which cannot be replaced. But the function that lithium does, can sodium do? That's an answer. And then the problem gets solved. Now here is an option for India. India has to look at buy, make to buy better, buy to make better, and make it together. Okay, for example, take sodium. I'm on the board of Reliance. I was on the board of Reliance, and we follow this. We make, etc., etc. So we brought Ferrition. Okay, it is not TRL9, it is at TRL78, but we are working together to make it happen.
Reaching prototypes.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And here, right here, Ravi Pandit spoke to us. He has a sodium-ion battery now. Outstanding work that he has done. On 12 December, you will hear about it because he is having a sort of press conference. So here is Make in India, and there is Buy to Make Better, so as to say. We have to look at those options. It is not that these materials are irreplaceable. I mean, let's be very clear about it, that science cannot do that magic. One point, by the way, we missed out was the nuclear part. Nuclear, day before, 3 days ago, we had both Sanjay Kirloskar for nuclear submarine. He makes the pumps, etc. He has got that technology in hand. And Anil Kakodkar speak in a session where I was there. He has sent me his presentation where he was showing, as a matter of fact, with the advance of SMR, what opportunities exist. And in fact shows that if India has to have the quality of life has to be like a developed country. He has calculated the total sort of energy consumption that we would require. And given the numbers where he says that level cannot be reached unless you bring in nuclear. And he has given those options. I think we should be having a serious discussion on that. It is not just technology, but policy, and there are so many other things, etc., that are involved.
Thank you, sir. So any questions from back there? No? Okay, sir. The person on the right there. Which one?
I'm General Pitre. While Colonel Avasthi were discussing semiconductors, I didn't find the mention of Taiwan, though he talked of China. Actually, Taiwan produces 60% of the semiconductors and 90% of the advanced semiconductors. Now, my question is, now after all, and he very rightly mentioned that the difficulty of chips and getting even our, in army, we wanted to get our ECHS card, they were delayed by 6 months. Now, after all, chips and semiconductors may not be a rocket science. It might be it's a mundane statement. Now, secondly, can't we cooperate and collaborate with Taiwan, a country which is very friendly to us? And why can't this industry be bought? It must be done, but why can't it be brought in a big way in India?
Excellent question. Can you give the mic to the person behind over there? Yeah, Colonel Avasthi, could you take that? I also wanted to ask you about Taiwan, and thank you for asking this question.
Thank you, sir. Firstly, sir, semiconductor manufacturing is a very, very complex process, sir. It's really very complex. If you ever go down to the semiconductor laboratory, that's the only place that I've been to as a fabrication facility. I think it outmaneuvers every James Bond movie that I've seen. That's one. Yes, sir. I'm coming to that. The second thing is, sir, Taiwan has built itself from a paddy economy to a semiconductor economy today, sir. And only holds the market share insofar as the foundries are concerned. When you make a wafer or when you make a chip, that doesn't mean it's complete. That's one. So secondly, in the overall end chain, it still doesn't end. One. The second thing is, sir, that technology costs. And now if anybody has got a hegemony over technology, do you think he'll be able to part with it? I don't think so, sir. That is one problem of the situation. No matter if he's friendly or foe or he's neutral or whatever the case may be. Now, a lot of instances have taken place in the past, and we at a government level are having a large amount of training courses with Taiwan, so to say. The problem, what you have mentioned very clearly, is which is the Achilles heel of this country today, sir, as per me, in my humble opinion, is skilling, sir. That is the problem. Firstly, because even if you get technology, sir, you don't have the requisite manpower because you still suffer from a 4-decade software hangover. If you ask my own son or your daughter, which computer science, except computer science, which engineering do you want to take? The answer is no. Because there's never been any return on investment in the last 40 years. Now, with that skilling, starting from a technician level to the undergrad level, to the grad level, and to the postdoctoral level, it doesn't exist here. So even if you transport that technology, how will you run it? So that is not the only problem. The problem is further. The problem is even if you develop this skill system, I think Dr. Mashelka would agree with me, where is the faculty? So if you look at it, it's a very complex puzzle, sir. So whether you become friendly or you import that technology or whatever it may be, it may not be very sustainable.
Thank you. Thank you. Can we come to that question, please? Sir, we have very little time. I want to capture many questions. We'll definitely talk during lunch. Yes,
Yeah.
sir. And then please give the mic after that to the woman behind.
Okay. Thanks at least giving that empowerment to me before the women. Firstly, thanks to Colonel Awasthi, we got to know about the lithium reserves. We are going with an agreement and all those things because since February there were darkness. There was no information shared after India Today, which we came to read in an article. 4 days prior, discovery of tantalum by IIT Roper was confirmed. My question is, what is the interest to the government and the associated industries? And if the confirmation is in high volume, how, as today's coinage word, how the semiconductor industry in India pole vaults? Thank you.
May I?
You want to take that? Please carry on.
I read that in the newspapers, but in my humble opinion, it is yet to be fully confirmed. Right? So let there be a little time. It's just 4-5 days old. It's an academic discovery. Just hold on.
Thank you.
Let it be
Question,
clear.
Next question. Yes, ma'am.
So as it was mentioned by many of you that to develop this particular sector, knowledge, skill and technology are of utmost importance, and that will face a lot of obstacles to develop. So with countries like US and China who already have monopolies in this sector and are trying to indigenize their production and supply, don't you think it will be too late for India to make its place in the global market?
Thank you for the question. It's never too late, really. Let me start with that, because when it comes to technology transfer, India has been proactively seeking out partnerships. It is the implication of our joining the Mineral Security Partnership, us having an MOU with the EU on this specific issue of semiconductors. If you look at the text of it, a lot of it has to do with technology transfers and skill development. The problem occurs on the ownership of IP and the creation of indigenous technologies. For that, as Colonel Awasthi mentioned, we lack current skills, we lack current faculty. Building that within our country is, I think, where the policy focus needs to be.
I'll just add a bit to what Janvi mentioned. So there are of course certain policies and government push in the developed world like US and the European nation. I'll give some examples. The current lithium-ion battery manufacturing capacity in the world is 1000 gigawatt hour currently. It is expected to grow up to 7000 gigawatt hour between 2030 and 2032. 7000 in the next 8 years. India has currently zero manufacturing capacity, lithium ion cell. There's some small here and there, zero. Even with PLI scheme and others, this may increase up to 100 to 150 gigawatt hour in 2030. 150 compared to 7,000 globally. So it's not that we are late, we have started something. And what we need to be cognizant about, there's a overcapacity globally, overcapacity, not just enough capacity, overcapacity. And we have small capacity. But this is true any time we start. If we start today, it will take 8 years. If we start in 2030, it will still take 8 years. So that start is very important. I think after that, once we are there, it's very easy to multiply. It's like compounding. So we need to be very patient. As has been mentioned earlier, we will not be able to do it tomorrow. But once we have the right direction, we'll be able to develop more manpower, capability, understanding about some of these technologies, so that when the time arrives, maybe between 2030 and 2050, when we require many of these in hockey stick manner, we can easily ramp up. So that is, yeah.
Thanks. It's like manufacturing. We keep saying that India has missed the manufacturing bus, but that's not the case. We never boarded it. And even today, if we board it, according to Rakesh Mohan, who came out with a wonderful paper at Brookings, there is 3 times more manufacturing still to be done across the world. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Rishabh, in continuation of what you told us about lithium-ion batteries, etc., can you tell us how significant are these new lithium reserves which have been discovered in India? How quickly can we actually mine from them? How quickly can we convert this into lithium-ion batteries? Can you tell us what is the timeline for these on the ground in practical terms? Thank you.
So there are two parts to these answers. The first is on the mining component. Any mining takes up to a decade. So lithium is no exception. So once we find it, there are certain steps to increase the probability of that find. So what we have found in Jammu Kashmir is at the lowest probability of find, statistical, not the quality. So it's at the G4 level. So the government and the Geological Survey of India and others need to do more studies to figure out what is the actual quality and the value of some of these minerals. And accordingly, that can happen. So that is in process. And not just in Jammu Kashmir. Jammu Kashmir one was quantified, but there are lithiums found in, I think, 10 to 12 other states in many hilly regions in the western part, even in the central region. Incidentally, tomorrow in Delhi, I'm also part of that discussion. The Ministry of Mines is auctioning many of these critical minerals, including lithium. So it's happening tomorrow. So evening, so you'll of course be in the news itself. And I think Colonel Avasthi already mentioned about the MMDR Act. What happened is that in the last full year in India, there was much discussion because of G20 and otherwise on critical minerals. After, I think, the Russia-Ukraine crisis, COVID, we realized how vulnerable we are. And what the government did is twofold, key policy initiatives. One is lithium was part of the atomic mineral list, like many other minerals, and which then meant that the Ministry of Mines did not necessarily have the power to start auctioning. Even the states did not have the auction power. And taking that out to the regular mineral list took some time and many months. So that has already now happened. The second is many of these minerals, the states were only responsible for auctioning of these minerals. Now, of course, at the perspective of many of these states may vary. I mean, it may not necessarily be the priority to scale up the mining and everything, though it seems like it's very important. What the government now has done is it has amended the MMDR Act, created a list of 24 minerals, which includes also lithium, and now the central government has the power to auction these minerals. But the revenue will of course accrue to the states itself. So these are two important policy changes that has happened in the last 6 months, and hopefully now we'll be able to auction. But to really do it at a level that we may require will take maybe up to a decade. So we need to be. The other bit is, I'll just add, quickly, what do we do with some of these minerals? We don't have the capability. If we don't develop that capability, which may again take many years, we'll have to export. So these are two things. One is we need to start mining. The other is parallelly start building our capability so that when we have these minerals from India or outside, we can also process it for different kinds of use.
I'll just add on to Rishabh on that. In
10 years you said it is going to take.
I'll just add on to Rishabh on that just for 20 seconds. It's J&K at the end of the day. So whether we like it or we don't like it, there are 4 very major concerns which we have to look at One is the environmental concern. It's a very fragile ecosystem there. That is one. The second thing is the security issues. I think it's a no-brainer. I don't need to dwell more on that. The third is a technological issue, which Rishabh has very clearly brought out as to how do you process it. It's a hard rock. So the auction is one way, but then the technology has to come fast. And the fourth one, and the most important one, where we are generally been found lacking in terms of all these critical things, is logistics. The warehousing, logistics, and the connectivity is a very, very major factor when you look at J&K. So see, it's again a complex circus.
In terms of timelines, because the question was on timelines, it seems to be far away, to be honest. It's being very clear about it. Also, there is G3, then G2, and then G1. They have been mostly at G3. We have to go to G2. The detailed one is sort of far away. So it's still sort of in the air. I mean, let me frank.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Dr. Alvite from Symbiosis School of International Studies, and previously with the National Security Council Secretariat. My question is to Mr. Rishabh, and this has already been partially answered by Colonel Sir and Marshal Kalshar also. Regarding the infrastructure, looking at your bioprofile, I think you have also worked on the renewable energy transition. India, like many other countries, are now putting lots of efforts towards going to green energy and also to focus on more thermal, hydro, and solar. But there is also kind of a concern about the infrastructures not being able to meet the rising demands within the country, including the reports being released by the SBI caps in September ending. So what, according to you, are some of the most pressing issues that we are going to face, and what should the government be doing about it? Thank you.
This is not to do with minerals, right?
No, sir, with energy, sir.
Yeah, so I think we'll leave that for the lunch discussion.
But,
broadly, I think the economy is growing faster than infrastructure can keep pace with. Please bring the mic here. And the critical minerals is one aspect of that, but the fact that energy requirements will be at least double of GDP growth over the next 10 or 15 years. Yes, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
My question is a little fundamental. We don't have the minerals, we don't have the expertise, we don't have the equipment, but there is something that we have got that nobody in the world has got. Is our market. Who is marrying the trade-off that we do from other countries whom China accesses? So that in the interregnum, we move faster than 8 years. Who's doing it? Who's advising? Who's guiding? And what
Very
is
good
ORF
question.
role?
Janvi, you should take this question.
So that's a very interesting question to discuss, because one of the elements that impacts the sector as a whole of critical minerals is China's investments in third countries. This is an aspect that we don't often discuss. When we talk about mines in DRC, in Chile, in other parts of the world, in Africa and Latin America, a lot of the times we forget that China has significant investments in these countries and owns a significant parts of these mines. So when we talk about India not having general capacity but the market demand, it is very much because we want to be a part of the global value chains, be a part of a electronics-led growth story or a manufacturing-led growth story. So India's response to that can't be only domestic manufacturing, or we have to have substitutes domestically. If we're talking about being part of value chains, investments are a very important part of it. Whether it's a public investment, a private investment, the nature of investment is still not clear. But we have to be sure that when we're talking about these alternate countries which have these resources, where we want access to these resources, how is the Indian government making it conducive for Indian companies to go and invest in these countries? How are these partnerships being built? That is a very important part of the policy push that we are not discussing as much as we really should be discussing.
Can I just add one more, burden you with one more question? How does WTO come into play when you have such commodity-based trade or monopolization or weaponization? How does WTO figure in there?
So the problem with the WTO right now is that it is essentially defunct. because the most important arm of the WTO, the
let's say it
dispute settlement
revives.
body,
Let's say it revives.
even if it does revive, there is a lot of resistance to having new issues added to the WTO, because it's been discussed in a joint statement initiative format that the Indian government is uncomfortable with for very legitimate reasons. But the problem is that the WTO is stuck in the past. It is stuck in the Doha round, which for context started when I was in second grade. So it is at this point a matter of reviving a zombie versus creating new conversations. At
Thank
the
you.
WTO.
Last.
Bad for us.
The zombies are.
That it is defunct. Is it good for us?
So
From investing in lithium somewhere else in the world.
It is bad for us because India has in general believed in multilateralism, and the WTO serves the function of allowing for checks and balances on monopolies that get created. It is not functioning, therefore you are getting these China being able to weaponize the critical minerals.
So it is bad for us but good for China?
It is bad for everybody. It is bad for everybody.
I think it's good for China.
No, it is not good for China. I will tell you why. Because China at the end of the day is depending on the WTO to have checks on the US. The US is also not in check. The EU is not in check. Look at the carbon border adjustment mechanisms. What is to us national security? To them it is strategic autonomy. They call it strategic autonomy, so it's not protectionist policy. And when we do it, it's protectionism. When they do it, it's autonomy. So, I mean, that's also a sort of thing that we need to remind ourselves of, because we're so used to taking it at face value that we forget to question the EU and its policies. Because EU is doing it, it's probably market friendly and right. That's also not a policy position we should take.
Thank you. Last question.
My name is Dinanath Kolkar. One of the data points I want to bring to the table was trade deficit between India and China. It's touched 100 billion. What is really causing that growth in that trade deficit? How much of that is caused by the import of minerals and materials which are used for electronics and things like that? Is there any study done on this growth rate?
So, one thing we forget when we're talking about trade deficits is because we are importing things where there's a demand for it in the market. So it's we've not seen the numbers yet, but it is very likely that a great percentage of what we are importing from China is going into value addition into some of these sectors we are developing. I can guarantee that Apple, which has set up a manufacturing unit now, is definitely dependent on about 80% of its parts coming from China when it is creating a smartphone in India. So it's really a matter of understanding that even China has trade deficits with other partners where it doesn't produce these products. So if we want to replace China with other partners, that is a question we need to be asking. I don't think we should be scared about trade deficits. We should be wondering who is the partner we have a trade deficit with.
I'll just add, specifically on the clean energy technologies, until recently we were importing around $3 billion of solar modules in the country, and less amount of batteries. Wind turbine manufacturing is fairly indigenized, up to 60 to 70% already happening because it's a vibrant sector, there was constant demand. But what has happened in last year, I think last year April itself, India put a basic customs duty on import from China, which then meant that if we import, we have to pay 40% taxes on solar module import from China, and solar cells, which are the basic components of manufacturing solar modules, 25% tax. Now, while this was happening, India has an FTA with many countries in the ASEAN region like Vietnam. So it was been rerouted from there. So it is now, Vietnam has suddenly become our largest partner for clean solar modules itself. So we have been importing a couple of $1 billion, but I want to lay emphasis that all of these are more or less on the final products. We don't import clean energy minerals because we don't have I want to reiterate, we don't have the capability to process those minerals. And China is importing minerals to manufacture or do the next steps there.
Thanks, Mr. Jain. Would you like any quick 30-second closing remarks? Yours, beginning with you.
There are a couple of things maybe I can mention. One is it's important to be patient and have a look at the actual time it takes to do something on the ground. there is role of policy to do certain things in the short term, in the immediate term, which is like you add a basic customs duty and things like these, something in the medium term, something in the long term. So we need to have that view on what is the broader purpose of the policy. This is the last thing. The other bit that I want to mention is that there's a clear need for collaboration and cooperation. Thinking that we'll be able to do everything within the country, even 20 years later, may not be the best economic decision for us, and we need to focus on steps that are based from our inherent strengths and not based on our weaknesses.
Colonel Avasthi.
Firstly, thanks, Gautam. Great discussion. From the last question, the gentleman who asked the last question, I will just bring you a quote from Deng Xiaoping in 1987.
Sir, we are out of time. Therefore, any closing remarks,
Yeah.
if you can just...
Just with this, Deng Xiaoping in 1987 said that if Middle East has oil, China has rare earths. 87. Look at the man's vision. So, India being a large market and whatever it may be, and with the skilling issues at hand and various other things at hand, I think it's a work in progress. And whether it is a revenge of geography, sir, or whatever it may be, I think we will prevail.
And with that, we close the session. No, I'll just say one thing that, and I think that's a message that has continuously come across. Critical minerals, critical materials, patience is key, because it is a developing sector, evolving sector. We've been in it for decades, we're going to be in it for decades, and it is a reality that these are materials we are dependent on imports for. So we need to figure out which sectors of, or which process of this entire supply chain we really want to build our capacities in, whether it is processing, whether it is mining. Clean mining is something that is not discussed enough. Maybe we should be discussing it, creating processes within the country on clean mining. So new areas also, as the question suggested, it's not just about is it too late for the current scenario. Are there new areas we can evolve and develop as relates to critical minerals is something we should be talking about.
Thank you. Just to close, I think this is a very new area, and I think with people like Dr. Mashelkar, Dr. Kelkar, and others here, one in policy, one in science. I think the Pune International Center, sir, if I may just be brave enough to say, can become the hub of new knowledge that can emerge from here. I think if there is a call for, national call for papers or scholarships, etc. I think because you are already 1 foot there, you are strategically, you have strategic knowledge, you have economic knowledge, scientific knowledge, and I think critical minerals sit on the cusp of these three various knowledges. And with that hope and with those best wishes, I would just like to close this session. Thank you very much, and I think we can continue this discussion over lunch.